This is our Boost Engagement with Donor Advised Fund donors with tips from Vanguard Charitable. And we want to welcome everyone for joining. I'm going to go through some logistics here at the beginning. First of all, yes, we are recording this presentation, and you will get a link to the recording within the next 48 hours. So don't worry about that. We are going to make sure we get everything documented for you. If you've never done one of these before, this is a Zoom webinar, is not a Zoom meeting. So it's a little bit different than a webinar. By the way, if you have, or than a regular Zoom meeting, if you have a problem with your access to the webinar and you need some technical assistance, you can email our training team at training@candid.org. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have card captioning for today's webinar. To set up the captions, you can use that QR code or go to the URL at the bottom of the screen. You are in listen only mode, which means we can't see or hear you, but we know you're there. We see the numbers going up and the number of people that are joining. If you want to give us feedback, we love seeing those little reactions at the very bottom of the screen. So if you want to share a heart or a thumbs up or thank you for the examples, anything you want to share through those reactions, it lets us know that you're there and that you're paying attention. Thank you so much for all of those. We are going to be passing along links in the chat. The chat is actually disabled for participants, but you will find lots of links in the chat. And thank you all for sharing all your reactions. I'd like to see that. So if you are looking for any of the links that we talk about in this presentation, we're going to try and drop them in the chat for you so that you can find them. The other thing that you should know is that we do want you to ask questions, and we have a team behind the scenes looking at those questions and making sure that they're there. We like you to ask them in the Q&A panel for a couple of reasons. So that Q&A panel is down at the bottom of the screen. You can type your questions in at the bottom of that panel. Wherever you have a question, you can type it in. And then you can also look at the other questions that have been asked. And if you see a question that's very much like what you would ask or something that's exciting to you, you can go ahead and put a thumbs up next to it. So we really appreciate that. Thank you so much for that. We are all behind the scenes. This is just a little handful of all the Candid staff that are participating today. So they're going to be watching the Q&A panel and answering some of the basic questions and also going through the questions and deciding which ones get asked from the speaker. And at the end, we're going to have a little feedback link for you. It'll come up when you disconnect from the webinar. You also get it in the email tomorrow. We really pay attention to these, and we really want to get your answers to whether this was good, it was something that you wanted to learn, something more that you want to learn about this topic. We love to hear that. So please do fill out that feedback. I know you get a lot of evaluation forms, but this one's really short and it's really used by us to make our programs better. So hopefully you will do that. You know us already, probably. We are Candid, candid.org. If you have not ever done anything with Candid before, you should know that we used to be two other organizations. One was Foundation Center. It's been around since the 50s, collecting information on grants and grant makers. 6 years ago, we merged with another organization called GuideStar. GuideStar's been around since the 70s, collecting information on nonprofits and putting it on guidestar.org, where there's a list of all the nonprofits in the United States. And together, what we try to do is collect all that information that we already have and make it available to you through the Foundation directory, through our Candid website, through our Insights page, which shares a lot of details about what's going on in the fundraising world right now. So if you haven't taken a look at candid.org or our Candid Learning section or any of our other resources, we encourage you to do so. We have many partners throughout the country. We have libraries that partner with us to offer free access to our tools. We also have many data partners, and we're going to be talking to one of them today. These are managers of DAFs and giving platforms and grants management software and tech like Meta. If you ever do a Facebook fundraiser, that connects with us through our resources and the Candid profiles that we encourage you to create. So I wanted to make sure that you know all about us. And me, I'm Dave Holmes. I'm the Educational Programming Manager at Candid. I'm in our Cleveland office. And I'm very glad to welcome Vicky Kelberer, who's going to join us from Vanguard. Vicky, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Absolutely, Dave. And thank you to Dave and the entire Candid team for inviting us to be here today. I think you all know I'm Vicky Kelber. I work at Vanguard Charitable, where I lead our donor experience and AI strategies team. And I am so excited to talk to you all today about how to boost your fundraising with DAF donors. So I'll hand it over to Dave to close out our intro, and then we'll get into the real topics.
Sounds great. Well, first thing that I want to do is ask you guys a little poll, and we just want to know how familiar you are with donor advised funds. I know you may have deep knowledge of them, you may not just know a little bit about them, but we would like to know what your ask is. And you can see the survey that's up there on the screen. You can go ahead and fill that in. And I cannot see the results, so we'll let that go for a little bit. And there we go. So it looks like many of you have received DAF contributions but want to know more, about 70% of you. That's fantastic. Some of you have heard of them but don't know much. Some of you have no idea what this is. And then there are a couple of you who are listed as DAF experts, and that's terrific. Well, we're going to talk about donor advised funds, or DAFs, in this, and I'm going to turn it over to Vicky in just a second. But if you don't know why this matters, you should pay attention to some of the details and some of the stats on how this is going. And we check these. Giving USA does an annual survey of giving, and everything points to the fact that DAFs are the fastest growing giving vehicle in the United States right now. That is something that is absolutely true. It's growing every year. And that DAF donors, people who give through donor advised funds, tend to give bigger gifts than individuals giving money away. And they give consistently year after year. So we're very interested in welcoming Vicky here to talk about this. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides and ask Vicky to come and talk about Vanguard. Here you go, Vicky.
The true test, any technologist. Can you share your slides in Zoom? Just going to give it a second. Everybody can see these. We're good to go. Great. I've got the thumbs up. Well, again, thank you to everybody who's attending here today. I love to see all of the reaction emojis, and the numbers continue to grow. So clearly this is a popular topic, right? A lot of folks in the nonprofit space want to learn about how to boost engagement with donor advised fund donors. And as we saw in our poll, most of you, almost 3/4, are already receiving contributions from DAFs, which is incredible, because I think, when I started talking with nonprofits about donor advised funds, and I should say the acronym DAF is one I'll use again and again, just less of a mouthful, that wouldn't have been the case. People had very low awareness of what is this giving vehicle, and how might it fit into a nonprofit fundraising strategy. So it's really wonderful to see how that shifted over time. I can get the slides to advance. Perfect. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, in just about 30 minutes, we are going to go through, first and foremost, some context setting. So we'll talk about who is Vanguard Charitable and what, importantly, is a donor advised fund. And we'll try to move through some of that context pretty quickly, but just to lay the foundation so that we're all on the same page about what a DAF is and who these donors are. And then pretty quickly, we will move into really doing some sizing of the impact and opportunity of working with DAF donors, and provide you with some real data from both the overall donor advised fund industry, as well as from internally at Vanguard Charitable, that I think really paints a picture of the incredible opportunity that exists with donor advised fund donors. And what a mouthful. And then finally, and I think this is probably the part that most of you are very excited about, given some of the responses to the poll that we posted, but we will offer you some very concrete, very practical tips about how you can enhance your fundraising strategy with DAF donors, not in a year, not a couple of months, but today, this week at your organizations. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first and foremost, where do I work? What is Vanguard Charitable? Well, Vanguard Charitable, like many of you, is a 501c3 public charity, and we are what is called a national sponsor of donor advised funds, meaning that we support DAF donors all across the country. And since our founding in 1997, our donors have recommended more than $23 billion to charity, and a lot of that has come just in recent years. This last year, we granted nearly $3.5 billion to charities. So it's a very exciting place to work and a very interesting nonprofit and how we support other charities in the industry. And our mission is to increase philanthropy and maximize its impact over time. So we are always thinking about how can we better serve the nonprofits and the donors that we work with, which is why it's so exciting to be here with all of you and get to see some of your questions. So just to set the stage, what exactly is this mouthful of a giving vehicle known as a donor advised fund? Again, I try to say DAF as much as possible. It's just simpler. But really, when you think about donor advised funds, they are strategic giving vehicles which sustain long-term charitable giving efforts. Now, again, that's quite a mouthful. So what does that really mean in practice? You can think about these donor advised funds, and these are the individual accounts that are overseen by a sponsor like Vanguard Charitable. Sort of like charitable savings accounts, right? Where a donor is able to open the account with a sponsor, contribute assets into that account, and typically those assets are non-cash. More about that later. And what the sponsor does is that we liquidate those funds and invest them into high quality, low cost investments so that the funds also grow over time. And with donor advised funds accounts, something really important to understand is that all of the contributions and all of the investment growth is destined for charity, legally and irrevocably. So this isn't like certain kinds of retirement accounts, for instance, where people could pay a penalty and take money out. Truly, all of the money is destined to go to charity. And that's exactly what donors do. So once the money is in the account, they're able to recommend or advise, that's where the donor advise comes in, grants to various charities all across the country and increasingly internationally. And then what we do, again, as the sponsor, is we provide the service of doing all of the due diligence about the charity, as well as the purpose of the grant to ensure that everything is within IRS regulations. The charity is typically a 501c3 in good standing, and that charitable purpose that the donor has advised to us is within, again, those IRS regulations. So that's another role that we play, providing that oversight at scale, which means that donors are free to focus on what typically matters most, which is giving to the causes and charities that they care about, right? We take on all that administrative burdens that donors are able to have a really simple, easy way to give to the charities that they support. Those are donor advised funds as a whole. I like to set up a little bit of data. I can't help myself. I love data. I ran our data science team in a past life about just the opportunity and the impact of DAF giving. Think first and foremost, the opportunity just in terms of the amount of dollars is really large and has grown rapidly year over year. Last year, I should say 2023, the most recent year we have data, we saw about $55 billion in grants, which is a number that has nearly doubled since 2019 and has more than doubled since I joined Vanguard Charitable all the way back in 2017. So we see with DAFs that the payout rate is usually around 20% for every year that we have on record, up to 25%. So there's a lot of money out there, and it's growing really rapidly year over year. But it's not just the dollar amounts, right? Because I think all of us know that not all grant dollars are created equal. The types of grants that you're going to see from donor advised funds look pretty different from the average when you look at charitable giving as a whole. So just looking at Vanguard Charitable over the last year, we saw that nearly 3/4 of our grant units went out unrestricted, meaning that you, the grantee, can use those dollars for your area of most need. When we look at the dollar figure, that's more than half of the total dollars. And that's incredible. The last statistic that I saw for the overall rate of unrestricted giving was around 20% of total dollars. So these are much more likely to come through to you. And again, you're just going to be able to use them for your area of most need. We also see that our donors are both finding new charities every single year, and they're also giving to charities that they have continued to support year on year on year. And that's huge. 17% of our grants are on a specific recurring schedule. But when we look at the underlying data, we see that more than half of the grants you make, they reveal some kind of ongoing sustained support to a charity year over year. So these grants are coming to you unrestricted and also can be really valuable source of sustained long-term giving relationships. And flipping from the money going out, right, the granting opportunity, I think something that I certainly did not appreciate before I joined Vanguard Charitable is the service that we play to turn non-liquid contributions, so non-cash contributions, into cash payments to charities that are very easy to process and to use immediately to support your missions. So last year, we saw that 85% of our contributions into accounts were coming in the form of non-cash assets. Think stocks and bonds. Those are kind of the typical contributions you might see from a DAF donor. But we're also seeing increasingly very complex types of assets like real estate, artwork, privately held businesses. And I know from working at much smaller organizations that even when we had the capability to take those non-cash assets, it was really labor intensive and quite costly. And so having the ability to cultivate DAF donors, you know that the eventual grants you receive are coming in the form of cash. Well, we work to unlock the complex and illiquid assets that people want to donate to charity. And then my final reason that I would think about DAF donors as part of your overall fundraising strategy is that there's been quite a bit of research that's been done on donor advised funds in recent years by many different academic groups, including the DAF Research Group. And what they've shown is that when disasters strike, and we define disasters very, broadly in terms of natural disasters, economic crises, man-made and humanitarian disasters, that donor advised fund donors are some of the most responsive and some of the most generous givers. And so when you think about times like COVID, for instance, when we saw a really significant market downturn, as well as this huge and really mysterious at the time public health crisis, we saw our donors immediately mobilize those funds and get tens of millions of dollars out in just a matter of weeks, totaling over $1 billion over the years that we tracked the support to COVID relief organizations. So a really important source of funding, not just over time when things are going well, but specifically, when you want to tap into a donor base that has funds at the ready to mobilize for charitable giving. All right, so hopefully I've managed to paint a picture of why I think everybody in a fundraising seat should care about the opportunity presented by donor advised fund donors. And I think by virtue of being here, you likely all understand that. I think the question that I normally get next is, this is great. We want to tap into this donor base. How the heck do we do so? So let's get into some more of the practical advice in terms of 6 steps to a DAF fundraising strategy. And we will go through all 6 steps. And what I'll say is that these are intended to be sequential. So really encourage you all to assess where you might be on this journey. Starting with step 1 is a great place to start. And by going through this process, you'll find that doing some of the work on some of the earlier steps really is a force multiplier for what you'll be able to do in some of the more advanced or sophisticated steps. So tip number 1, and of course, we are here in partnership with our longtime data partner, Candid. I promise they did not pay me to make this statement. But one of the things that we always recommend for all of our donors is to update your information and your data where it will be most impactful. And the number 1 place to do that is in the Candid database. And I'll tell you a bunch of reasons why, and even peel back the curtain so you can see how that data shows up to our donors in our portal. But if you take nothing else away from what I'm about to show you with the Candid data, by increasing your profile on Candid, so earning one of the seals, we've seen that it is a huge boost to the amount of grants that donors are making to your organization every year. So when we looked at the data, we saw that if you've got a platinum seal of transparency, meaning you've provided a huge amount of data about your programs that cannot be found on your 990, that those organizations are receiving on average twice the amount of grants as organizations that don't have a seal at all. And we actually saw a positive boost across all of the seals. So if you had a bronze, a silver, a gold, we're seeing increases across the board. But by earning that top seal, you're really going to make yourself and your impact a lot more prominent to a huge amount of donors. because it's not just, as you saw on this slide that Dave showed, Vanguard Charitable that's using the Candid database to power a donor experience. It is so many other grant makers, so many other giving platforms. And so it's a way that you can get your organization's mission and impact in front of millions of donors by filling out a single profile. So it is really well worth your time. The second piece that I always recommend is to also claim your account with PayPal for Charities. So this is a organization, as I think everybody's probably familiar with PayPal at this point, but we've partnered with them and a few others to create a method of sending grants electronically. And so when you claim your PayPal profile, what you will be able to do is receive funds as soon as the same day that that grant is approved, and you'll save a ton of time and money on checks and the processing of checks, which I know can take up a huge amount of organizational energy. So those are the two places I would really recommend focusing your efforts, especially as I know we are all busy and there are so many sites that you could enter your data on. Candid is going to make a huge difference to how donors find and connect with you. And PayPal is going to make a huge difference in terms of how you actually receive the funds. All right, so let's peel back the curtain. What does this actually look like for donors? So what you're seeing here is a real view of what we call our Discover Charities experience, or how donors are searching for, finding, and recommending grants to charities. As you can see here, and feel free to zoom in, we've got an experience that really puts that Candid data at the forefront. And so when you do a search like Animal Shelters Houston, you're going to see not just the charity name, you'll see the also known as name. So you can see on the third option there, Houston SPCA is another name for the Houston Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. You'll also see where the organization is located, its EIN, the cause area that it supports, its revenue and size, when it was established, whether or not that organization can accept check or electronic payments. And then finally, a short preview and snapshot of the mission. And that's all within the search results that every donor is seeing when they're going to make grants. But donors also have the opportunity to go deeper on our site. So we also recently launched these charity profiles in our granting experience. And this is a way for donors to explore some of the most critical data that you would find in a Candid profile. And you can see here this organization, which I chose at random, they've got a gold seal of transparency. And you can really see how rich the data is that a donor would be able to explore without ever leaving the Vanguard Charitable site. Because the more that somebody has to leave and go to your website or go to another site to do research, the less likely they are to complete that grant. And so we really want that giving experience to be frictionless. And so a great way to help us do that and make sure our donors can find your organization is to claim your profile and really increase the data that you share there so that you're presented with not just the basic 990 information, but much more deeper, and I would argue more critical information about your mission and your impact. So that's step number one. Step number two, once you've done that, you want to look at your own organization's website, fundraising materials, be they emails, tweets, Facebook campaigns, mailers, and you want to think about how can I make it as clear and easy as possible for donor advised fund donors to grant to my organization. And that can really start with just making it clear that you are eligible to receive grants from donor advised funds. I always say if you do nothing else, put that on your donation page so that people really know that you are one of the organizations that they can legally recommend grants to. Second, I would really make sure that you're highlighting your EIN, because that's going to be something which a donor can use as the key to find your organization, right? There's so many organizations that could pop up in a charity search if you're just searching for general terms or even the name of a charity. And so making your EIN very prominent and accessible, just going to reduce that friction that much more. And then if you really want to step it up, I would recommend having things like a donor advised fund giving landing page that people could click into, including information about giving from your donor advised fund, really wherever you're doing your fundraising. Because the thing to know about most donor advised fund donors is that they are largely individuals and their families. And so you're not talking about, trying to reach out to these large corporations or foundations in most cases. You're really talking about connecting on a human level. And so I think the fundraisers in this room, you know how to do this better than anyone else. And so adding that additional information to your calls to action, particularly at times of crisis or need, to remind folks, hey, if you've got a donor advised fund, those funds are already at the ready to give away. That's really going to up your game with your donor advised fund donors. Because I guess that many of you might already actually have folks with DAFs who are giving to your organization, but are often giving via other means. To make it really easy to establish that DAF connection, and think about different ways that you might do that in all of your fundraising materials. All right, tip number 3, educate your staff and have a data collection strategy. So this one I think is so critical when you've moved past that attracting gifts from donor advised fund donors into cultivating relationships with them. And once again, as somebody who has led data science teams, you really cannot manage what you are not measuring. And many people really couldn't say how many donor advised fund donors they have in their current donor roles. So making sure that everyone on your staff who interacts with donors, from your customer service to your relationship managers, your finance folks, if they're involved in those relationships or processing those gifts, your data science team, really has an understanding of what donor advised funds are and how to identify those donors, and then to appropriately capture their data. I cannot tell you how sad it makes me that in so many CRMs, all of the donors giving from a DAF like Vanguard Charitable are just called Vanguard Charitable. And people aren't capturing the information that they're choosing to share, or reaching out then to those donors to cultivate relationships after a grant has been received. So you really want to make sure that whoever or however you are collecting that data, that you are tagging the donor, the fund name, which DAF it came from. That can be a really important data point as you segment your donors, as well as, information about, is this a first-time DAF gift, a recurring DAF gift? That can all really help your fundraising team and relationship managers to identify these folks and cultivate those relationships with them over the long term. Because one thing you can know, if someone is giving with a DAF, in all likelihood, they have more money to give to you, and the size of those gifts can be quite sizable. Which leads me to tip number 4. And this one, again, I think is something that really relies on having some really good foundations from the first 3 steps to be able to enact what is truly a relationship engagement strategy, not just a gift cultivation strategy. And so when you think about sending thank yous, sending impact reports, you want to make sure, now that your team is capturing the donor's data, that you're sending those to the actual donor who recommended the grant. So send the thank you to the donor, not the DAF sponsoring organization. We get so many lovely impact reports and thank yous, and it really is wonderful to see. So I appreciate those. But you really want to be cultivating that donor relationship. And so a common misconception I hear from folks about DAFs and their donors is that, well, those people don't want us to reach out to them. And in my seat, leading our digital experience team, I get the privilege of talking to our donors all the time. And I have to tell you that if they are sharing their information with you, that's usually just not true. They want people to reach out to them. And in fact, a lot of folks tell me, I love giving with my donor advised fund. The one thing that I don't love is that I don't always then get the thank yous or the impact reports, because I don't think people realize who the gift is coming from, even though I'm sharing my address on every single grant. So think about that in your cultivation strategies of how you reach out to that donor. And of course, best practice, always give people the option to opt out. If they really don't want to talk to you, of course, having that option is important. And that usually goes across the board for any type of cultivation that you're doing. And then stepping it up a bit, step 5 and 6, I will say, are definitely some of the more advanced strategies that you can employ in working with DAF donors. But these can lead to really sizable gifts over time. So, one thing I'd really encourage you to do is to think about how you might, now or in the future, incorporate donor advised funds into your complex asset and deferred giving programs. So, like I mentioned when we talked about the illiquid or complex assets, it can be really complicated to take those assets, especially if you're a smaller charity, and don't necessarily have the infrastructure to accept incredibly illiquid or complex gifts. So, with that in mind, oftentimes donors will work with us to process the complex asset, fund accounts, and then set up giving strategies to charities over time. And the same goes for deferred giving. Many of our donors will set up what are known as endowed grant plans, which aim to continue giving to the causes and charities that matter to that donor in the years after their passing. And so those are two areas that you can really think about DAFs as partners to set up these gifts and these complex asset contributions so that the donor can then enact their charitable strategies with you involved and really being that expert partner to that donor relationship as well. And then finally, and I know I've been talking a lot about focusing on the donor, not the DAF sponsor. And so step number 6, truly, a very specific way of interacting with donor advised fund sponsors as opposed to donors is to understand that there are grant making programs that come directly from the DAF sponsors ourselves. So when you look at your local area, you likely have at least one, if not many, community foundations that are operating in your region. Take a look and see if any of them have regional granting funds or granting programs that you could apply to and be a part of in the years to come. The second is what are known as single issue DAFs. And so there are donor advised funds that focus on specific cause areas. So again, if you're operating in a very specific cause area and you realize there's an alignment with one of those single issue DAFs, great idea to reach out and find out how to get more involved with their donor base. And then finally, and this is common at all different types of donor advised funds, sponsors often have what are called field of interest funds. So at Vanguard Charitable, we have two grant making funds. One is targeted at sustainable disaster relief, and the other is called the Philanthropic Impact Fund, which supports charities that are lifting up the nonprofit space as a whole. So again, this is pretty advanced in your donor advised fund fundraising strategy, but I would encourage you to take a look. See if any of those grant making programs align with your cause area and your mission, because that can be another source of grants from donor advised fund sponsors, not donors. So those are the 6 steps that I would start, again, not tomorrow, not next week, but think about how you start them today and this week. It's only Wednesday, right? So still got at least 2 more days in most folks' work week. And if you're looking for, hey, what could I do in an hour, 90 minutes to really make an impact? I would start with reviewing your Candid profile, updating as much information as you can, reach that platinum seal, and then do a review of your organization's fundraising materials and see where are the gaps that we could make it clearer, easier, and more straightforward for folks with DAFs to give to our organization. Because looking at the data, one thing I can tell you, I think we've got 2,000 or so folks in this webinar. I would guess that most of you are already receiving DAF grants. In fact, your poll tells me that that is true. And so hopefully this can be a wonderful way for you to expand on those relationships and really form those long-term giving relationships with DAF donors. And with that, since I need a sip of water, just know that we also want to be partners on this journey. Fully take credit for the corny picture. But I am here to connect with you. So please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to stay in touch. I know we're going to have a ton of questions, so I want to leave plenty of time for that. But just thank you again all for being here. It's been a real pleasure already to get a sneak preview of what we'll talk about next. And definitely here to support as you have other questions or want to dig in deeper.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Vicky. This is terrific. There's Vicky's contact information if you want to make sure that you have it there. I'm going to switch to my slides and just have a couple of quick ones before we get into the questions. So Vicky can get a drink of water and be ready for these. Just so you know, and as Vicky mentioned, if you haven't gone on and updated your Candid profile, It's very easy to do. You can earn a bronze seal of transparency in less than 5 minutes. Takes you very little time to get the rest of the seals of transparency. So take a look. If you've never done this before, we do have seals webinars that we've been doing this spring and summer so that we can get you up to speed in getting this done. And just make sure that you keep your profile up to date, especially your contact information and how you can be contacted to get gifts. That's what's going to make it most important to you. So we do have some questions, Vicky, and I'm going to go to the chat and pull a few out from there and just see if there's anything that we can do here in the time that we have left. We just have a few minutes left, but what I'm going to say is the first question I want to ask is, well, geez, there's just so many good ones. Let me go in and pick one of the ones. I've heard that there are a lot of surprisingly young donors who have a lot of assets in DAFs. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like most financial instruments, donor advised funds are certainly having their millennial moment. And I think I can make that joke because I am a millennial. But we are seeing an increasing share of our donors in that age range of 20s, 30s, 40s, every single year. And so I think sort of the traditional myth around donor advised fund donors is that it's all kind of the same type of person. They might be older, they might have a lot more assets. And there are over 2 million accounts at this point that are donor advised fund accounts. And so that's actually a really diverse population, including increasingly more and more young people that are looking to take advantage of a one-stop shop for their charitable giving. I have to say, I love having a donor advised fund for that exact reason, that it really makes it easy for me to support all of the charities that I want to support in a year and gives me a single portal to do that in. So absolutely, I can at least anecdotally vouch for some of the younger folks that it is a really easy way to give. And so I wouldn't cut yourself off from thinking that anyone in your fundraising role couldn't be a DAF donor. Sometimes it might really surprise you who those folks are, and they might also be giving with a larger family unit that you wouldn't know if you're just treating them as an individual. So that's something else I would also keep in mind.
Great. There's a lot of questions that are coming in similar to this one. What should I put on my DAF landing page?
Such a great question. Well, I can think of a couple of examples of excellent landing pages I've seen recently from some of our charitable partners. So I would say sort of minimum MVP, just make sure that you've put in very clear language. This is a charity that's eligible to receive grants from a donor advised fund, and that is typically 501(c)(3s in good standing with the IRS, with some exceptions. Of course, the tax code is very nuanced. And so again, if you do have questions, please feel free to pop those in the chat as well. I would also really make prominent your EIN or employer identification number. That is really the cheat code for donors to take that and drop it into almost any giving platform, donor advised funds, private foundations, corporations, workplace giving, you name it. That's going to be the key to really make sure they're giving to the right organization. And if you've got, some kind of special status, like you're a fiscally sponsored project, make sure all of that is really clear as well, right? You're going to give to this EIN, make sure that you make the purpose for a specific project to this fiscally sponsored project under that EIN. So that's sort of level one of what I'd recommend you put there. And then again, if you want to step it up, you can put stories and testimonials from folks who've given to your organization with their donor advised fund. I've seen some really powerful stories of how people have been able to give far beyond what they originally intended because of those investment gains. And that was something that they may not have realized before. And then I'm also increasingly seeing organizations linking out to some of the largest DAF providers. And so that's something as well that makes it, again, really easy to take that EIN, drop it right into your online account so that you can find the charity and initiate the grant. So think about some of those strategies. And again, it will look different depending on the type of organization and the type of donors that you are interacting with and trying to grow your relationships with.
That's great. Thank you for that. There's another question that a lot of people are asking. It's a variation of this one. Not all DAF gifts include the donor information on how to reach them. What do you recommend on how to get their information?
Absolutely. It's a very common question. And I know from our data, we can see that over 95% of the grants that we send out are going out with some type of data to identify the donor. But people will often miss it if it's not a straightforward name or physical mailing address. So one of the things that I would double check and train your staff on is the fund name. Because very frequently, in fact, I would hazard to say almost all of the time, the fund name includes the donor or the family name. And so that can often be a really good way to identify who that gift was coming from. And of course, there are cases where donors simply choose not to share their organization. So, in those minority of cases, I would still encourage you to be including donor advised donors in your general messaging and thank you to all donors. A lot of the time, even if they've chosen to remain anonymous, we hear from our donors that they're still on your newsletters, they're still seeing your impact reports. They've just not chosen to share that information through their DAF gifts. And so, they're still listening. And so make sure you keep that in mind. Again, tell those amazing stories about impactful gifts from DAF donors, because that's going to be another way to acknowledge them without doing so directly.
Great. That's great suggestions. This is a question. What motivates DAF donors to choose certain nonprofits over others?
Hmm.
And how would you say we can position our organization to stand out?
Wow, what an amazing and philosophical question. And I would have to say, it really is as diverse as any donor motivation. As I mentioned, the vast majority of donor advised fund donors are individuals and their families. So just like different things are going to motivate me and my husband in terms of where we give, or if I'm giving with my broader extended family, that likely has a really different focus. It really is the same with donor advised fund donors. So I'd almost flip that question on its head and really be thinking about what is your unique value proposition in the space where you're making an impact, right? What about your organization stands out, is different, is something that will really connect with donors because it really is your story. Ultimately, it's always the story of impact, of mission. And I think that's true whether or not people are giving with a DAF. I do think the choice whether to give with the DAF or not can be very related to those friction points. So if a donor is connecting with you, they're connecting with your cause, your mission, your impact, but then they can't figure out, are you eligible to get those DAF gifts? What's your EIN? Are you fiscally sponsored project? Do I need to give to a specific purpose? Is there someone I should notify in the fundraising department? We hear these donor questions all the time. And so making that really clear and easy, hate to be a broken record, but I actually think that is continues to be one of the most impactful ways that you can make it much more easy for people to give with their DAFs. But again, those individual motivations are going to be as diverse as those 2 million people that give with donor advised funds. I would say what makes them unique is the desire to usually give strategically over time with those sustained relationships, but you still got to tell your story.
Terrific. Thank you. We're almost out of time. I just want to ask one more quick question that kind of combines a bunch of them. Is there a benefit, like the new tax bill, does that affect DAF giving? What do you see as the future of DAF giving, given some of the new changes that are going on?
Well, I will say I am not a charitable giving policy expert. I am definitely your girl if you want to chat about refugee or migration policy from a past life. But I actually know that we have just recently published a blog on our website, which we can share, written by incredibly intelligent legal and regulatory minds that really delves into what is the impact on DAF giving, what is the effect that we expect to see. I won't play too much of a fortune teller and try to predict the future of DAFs with my crystal ball, but based on everything that I've seen, I think that this type of giving vehicle is only going to increase in popularity. We're really only going to see the number of grant dollars and the number of grants continue to increase year over year. And if history is any teacher, we will see that when there is inevitably, unfortunately, some kind of disaster, the funds from DAFs are going to be there and going out more quickly than almost any other kind of giving vehicle. And so that would be my prediction for the future of DAFs. We will hope that that continues to come true.
Well, thank you, and please everybody join me in thanking Vicky for coming. Thank you all. You're going to get a lot of resources and things set in the follow-up email, which will be coming by Monday. So keep a look out for that. And we'll thank you all, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care. Thank you, Vicky,
Thanks,
and all
everyone. Thanks,
the
Dave.